Every test in our life makes us bitter or better. Every problem comes to break us or makes us. The choice is ours, whether we become victim or victor.
My name is Ji Young-an, and I am the sister of Dong Young-an. It was a long and difficult decision to sit and write this statement. Bringing up the feeling and memory is still something I avoid doing. It was a Sunday, and I think he was playing basketball with our church youth group, Korean church youth group kids. They went over to a local school court to play, and 5 or 8 white teenagers came over. He said he didn't know them. They asked, "Do you want to play 5-on-5?" And they agreed. They started playing basketball. It seemed like the white boys were purposely fouling, pushing them, shoveling, and that happens in basketball. So my brother was the oldest among the kids who went with him. He said, "Come on, let's play. Let's just play a game. Why are you guys pushing?" And they would keep on pushing, snicker about it together, So it came up to a point where it grew into an argument, and my brother said, "I had enough, we're gonna go." And that's when they started kind of, "Who the F do you think you are?" About 5 or 8 more kids came, so there were in total about 12 to 16 kids. He heard from the back, "There's that chink standing there alone. Let's jump on him now when he's alone." My brother turned around and they circled him. And they're like, "Chink, go back to your country, and we're not even from China." After they spit on his face, they knocked him to the ground. 4 or 5, maybe even more kids started to step, stomp, and kick his head, face, and back. He was lying on the ground. He did not fight back. All the facial cheekbone was all just cracked into pieces. Nose bone fracture, and he lost sensation. There was a nerve damage, so he lost sensation on 4 of his upper teeth and whole bottom of the part. He doesn't have sensation till now, and it's been about a year since that happened. The police report was that they wrote it up as if it was a gang fight. That they were playing basketball, they got in an argument, it was a mutual fight. They thought it was a Chinese gang versus American white gang, and that offends me, just because of the description of how I look and how we are. The image of my brother falling on that concrete floor and people stepping and just kicking with shoes on his face, I couldn't get that image out of my head. What goes through one's mind when they kick and step on a living human being just covering his face and head to survive? What does one have to do to deserve all this? Getting into an argument playing basketball? I had a chance to read my victim impact statement at the court. I wanted to see the kids who did this to my brother. And after I read my statement, I said, just because someone speaks less English than you, just because someone looks a little different than you, and whether if it's the same, that doesn't give you any right to step, to kick or spit on someone's face. And the response I got from him was, "I'm sorry I caused you such inconvenience."
The United States system of justice, while not perfect, allows the family of victims to express themselves in writing or verbally after an accused defendant has been convicted. These comments are generally welcome during the sentencing phase of a trial. While there are opponents who feel the emotionalism of victim impact statements can prejudice judges and influence the severity of the sentencing handed down, there is research by David and Smith which concludes that impact statements neither increased officials' consideration of harm to victims nor resulted in generally harsher sentencing decisions. What is known is that as victims and families work through the emotional, psychological, and financial impact of their trauma as victims, The ability to express themselves is just one small morsel of decency that is offered to heal their lifelong wounds in hopes of directing them to find some degree of closure. The first witness impact statement can be attributed to Doris Tate, the mother of slain actress Sharon Tate. Sharon Tate was brutally murdered by a group later coined as the Manson Gang. When Doris became aware that one of the gang members, Leslie Van Houten, had obtained 900 signatures, people advocating for her parole, Doris Tate waged a campaign gaining 350,000 signatures to keep Miss Van Houten behind bars. Doris and her daughters were instrumental in passing Proposition 8, the Victims' Rights Bill in the state of California. And Doris Tate was the first Californian to attend a parole hearing, yes, for none other than Leslie Van Houten, giving the first documented victim impact statement. And because of the efforts of Doris Tate, all 50 states allow victim impact statements at some point during the sentencing phase of a trial. These statements are also permitted at parole hearings. In September of 1994, Theodore Johnson was released from a psychiatric hospital under supervised parole. Johnson had been committed because of the brutal murder of his wife and girlfriend. One of the conditions of his parole was that he was to report any relationship with women. While on an unsupervised outing, he met Angela Best, whom he immediately pursued for a relationship. Over the span of 20 years, while still having supervised visits by his social worker, he never disclosed this relationship. In 2016, Angela Best found out about Johnson's previous murders past and ended the relationship. On the morning of December 15th, Johnson struck her 6 times with a claw hammer and strangled her with a dressing gown cord. After Johnson killed Best, he tried to commit suicide by throwing himself in front of a train, losing his right arm and left hand. At trial, Johnson eventually confessed to the murder of Angela Best and was sentenced to 26 years in prison. Lorraine Jones, the sister of Angela Best, provided a family impact statement outside of the courtroom.
Come to stand by the microphones here, and if everybody can stand around you. Thank you very much.
Just to introduce, this is Lorraine. This is Lorraine Jones. This is Angela's sister.
She was kind, loving, and very, very caring. She was always smiling and radiant. It was never any trouble for Angela to offer help and support to anyone who needed it, because that was her nature. Angela has children and grandchildren whom she doted on and loved dearly. Angela has parents, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, cousins, and other extended family and friends who all loved her dearly. She was the heartbeat of our family. This convicted murderer tried to play the system as he has successfully done so twice before. He used diminished responsibility as the cause for his murderous actions. This time, however, by eventually pleading guilty to murder after 12 months since his arrest and subjecting our family to unnecessary additional trauma, he has shown in all cases he was clearly of sound mind. He knew exactly what he was doing when he planned and executed the horrific murder of our beautiful, beloved Angela. Despite our family's immense pain and suffering, our hearts and thoughts go out to the other two families who have also suffered as a result of his evil and calculating actions. We would like to thank the police, the prosecution team, and all those who have sent us their kind thoughts. The facts of this case have been reported. Our family had no further comment. We therefore ask the press to kindly respect our privacy at this incredibly difficult time to allow us to grieve. Thank you very much.
It's no secret that crime stories attract viewers, listeners, and readers. It means victims of crime are often thrust into the limelight, whether they're willing or not. Large-scale tragedies like the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing and the 1999 Columbine High School massacre in Littleton, Colorado, draw thousands of journalists and force hundreds of victims into the public eye. While tragedies with fewer victims but sensational circumstances can also inspire a media frenzy. A frenzy capable of magnifying a victim's pain and suffering. It happened to Ellen Levin in 1986 when her daughter was murdered. Robert Chambers killed Jennifer Levin in a case that the media called the Preppy murder. The case received national attention from mainstream as well as tabloid media, and that meant intense pressure for Jennifer Levin's family.
Case that was really custom built for headlines because it included two young, beautiful people. The murder took place in Central Park. It was rumored that they both came from wealthy families, which was not true, but this caught the headlines. I was thrown into, of course, the worst moment of my life when I heard of my daughter's death, but it was made twice and three times as bad by the media circus that surrounded it. There were hordes of people outside the loft that I was supposed to be up in to be with my family. We had curiosity seekers, but more than that, there were hundreds of reporters. The news media were there en masse with cameras and microphones. I was so frightened that I didn't want to leave the car. I mean, it just, my throat closed. I couldn't talk. I couldn't react to anything except fear that I was, people were running towards me, and I was at my weakest moment of my life, which I think most crime victims, especially new crime victims who just get the news, it couldn't be at a more vulnerable time. And I heard them screaming, there's the mother, and they were running, and the police were running behind them to try to get to me to protect me, and it was one of the most horrifying moments of my life. And as the day progressed, and the police were out looking for her murderer, Robert Chambers confessed. And in his confession, he made up a story that included rough sex, how Jennifer tried to rape him. I mean, he was 6'2", about 210 pounds, and nobody believed his story. The police didn't believe him, the DA didn't believe him. Nobody believed him, but the media loved it.
The arrest of Chambers and the subsequent trial created an uncontrolled media circus that totally distorted the facts of the case, making Levin's daughter seem like the perpetrator instead of the victim, putting the family on the defensive, and invading the privacy of anyone who might have a connection or information relating to the story.
My son, Anthony Dyer, who was 16 years old, had joined a gang that I didn't know about, and the gang that he was in, they murdered him. My son hadn't come home, and it was on my pay week, and he hadn't came home for 2 days. That Friday, I was going to call the television station and asked them to air my son on the TV, but that evening I heard about a body had been found and I didn't feel comfortable with that. I went down to look at the body, and what I saw, it didn't look like my son because his face was swollen. He was frozen. It was a bitter cold. The only way that I really identified him was by his fingernail biting. And it was hard. It was very hard to deal with that. They end up beating him. Then they wrapped him up and put him in a towel and put him in a trash can. So the leader of the gang told him to 69 him, which meant kill him. So one of the guys went down the hill and kicked him in his head until he wasn't breathing anymore. And he took his gym shoes off that I had just bought him. When they finally picked him up, the guy that had kicked him in his head, he had his shoes on. I didn't even know my son was in the gang until after he passed. He was only 16. To me, he was still a baby. I had a memory lost. People that I had known for years, I couldn't remember who they were. I couldn't go back to work for at least 3 weeks. People would question me about different things, and I didn't want to deal with it. I would cry all the time. It's just your whole life, it's just turned upside down. None of them showed any remorse. Next year, 3 of them, when we get out, they plea bargain. Some of them got 7 years. One of the girls that cleaned up the blood at the apartment that he had got beat up at, she's out. The leader of the gang got 15 to 30. The one guy that had his gym shoes on, he got 12 years. No, he got 16 years. And a guy that took his clothes off and burned them, he got 12 years. So they all got time. If you've committed a crime and it's totally shut out and you're going on with your life, well, that family, they're not going on because their life is forever changed. It will never, never be the same. And it hurts because I know my son wanted to live and it wasn't fair. It was not fair.
In January of 2016, India Chipchase was trying to leave a local bar. According to court records, Ms. Chipchase was intoxicated when approached by Edward Tenniswood, who was offering assistance to get her home. Tenniswood instead took Ms. Chipchase to his home, where he raped and strangled her. After killing her, he left her lifeless body and went to a hotel bar for drinks. He was later arrested after the police tracked Ms. Chipchase's phone to his home. His level of depravity was unspeakable, as he testified in court that his interaction was consensual and that he inadvertently throttled her because of his inexperience and incompetence in the bedroom. Here is Ms. Chipchase's father with his impact statement that was released after the trial.
I have been given the victim personal statement leaflet and the scheme has been explained to me. What follows is what I wish to say in connection with this matter. I understand that what I may say may be used in various ways and it may be disclosed to the defence. I am Jeremy Chipchase, father to India and her 3 siblings, Harry, Lulu and Pia. For 20 years, myself and her mother Sue loved India. We love her now and we will always love her. Even though we will never experience her smile, her laughter, her caring again, her photographs will adorn our walls, the memories of her 20 years will live on, and her spirit will always be in our hearts. Whatever happened that night, whatever stories are told, the fact is my daughter was murdered. I sincerely hope that there is no possibility that any other woman ever suffers at the hands of my daughter's murderer. Speaking from a father's perspective, I do not want any other father to hear that their daughter has gone missing like I did, and then for them to hear she's been found dead. No other father will therefore have to see the devastation that I have seen in Sue, Harry and Pia and Lulu's faces. No other father will have to see their daughter's body in the mortuary and be told they are unable to touch her or kiss her one last time. No other father will have to carry her coffin into a church with his son. And no other father will have to see her mother and siblings grief at the church service. No other father will have to touch the coffin and say, "Love you, Ind," and then see the curtain close at a crematorium. And no other father will be hit with a wave of emotion at a wedding as I was, on realising that I would never walk injured down the aisle. I'm sure that I and other family members will continue to have moments like this of pain, anguish, emotion until we take our last breath. I therefore reiterate, I do not want there to be other victims at the hands of Ind's murderer, and therefore no other families to experience what we have. I hope that the sentencing reflects this.
The massacre at Columbine High School in Littleton, to me, was probably the first example of the news media in the information age having immediate access as the crime was occurring to many of the victims. It was a highly unusual case where there really were not very many restraints in covering the crime. The question has been raised, seriously, whether or not it was perhaps helpful for the children as they were fleeing traumatized and wounded from Columbine High School as the crime was still occurring, whether or not it was perhaps helpful for them to be immediately interviewed by journalists. I find this question absolutely preposterous, that the media or anyone could feel that an untrained person with no experience in trauma response or mental health could consider their talking to victims as they were in shock, physically wounded, that they could consider this to be helpful, and yet that question has been raised and I think merits further discussion.
My daughter and I were going to the grocery store in the morning in November of 1979, and she was 5 months old, and we were hit head-on by a drunk driver. It was his fourth time for drunk driving. He had no license, he had no insurance. He drank a pint of whiskey about before 10 o'clock in the morning. My daughter was in a car seat, and the straps just busted on it, and she came around and hit the back of her neck right here on the corner of the dashboard and crushed. You have a cervical section of your spinal cord, and it goes C1 through C10 to right about here, and she crushed C4, 5, and 6, these three vertebrae right here, and they kind of twisted like this and went across and then ended back on top of her spinal cord, and she was paralyzed from the neck down. And I broke about 14 bones from the waist down, and I have a couple of plates in my left foot, and I have a rod in my right leg. You know, she always had pneumonias, and she had atelectasis, and she had bladder infections, and she had tracheostomies and other kinds of infections, and she had seizures. I had 7 years of playing tug of war with God, and I knew that he'd win someday. She died, and that was in 1986. I try and have the good pictures in my head of Laura instead of the bad pictures now, but the bad pictures plagued me for a long time, and the hatred was just unbearable for the man that hit me. I mean, that was like just carrying an extra tumor, you know, a big tumor. And so you've got the hate, you know, it's just this intense hate, and you lay in bed at night, and you know, I used to concoct all kinds of plans on how I was going to kill this guy. And then I thought, I'm not going to kill him. I'll hit him in the back of the neck with a lead pipe. I'll have somebody hold him down. I'm going to paralyze him like he did Laura. And then you just go on with these scenarios, and you just build this up. So now you've got all this hatred for this person, and you get all this pain and sorrow. Sometimes the people who do it, even after they've been picked up for drunk driving, they still don't see themselves as a problem, you know, because maybe somebody isn't in their face showing them a picture of their dead daughter, or telling them what that felt like, or how horrifying it was to have her chew her fingertips off because she couldn't feel them and was covered with blood one morning. You know, now let's start thinking about, what if it was your kid? What if somebody did this to your kid? Let's start thinking about that a little bit, you know, or it happened to your mom or your boyfriend or your girlfriend or your wife or whatever. You know, start thinking in those terms a little bit, and, you know, maybe that'll, I don't know, help deter you. You want a drink? Drink. Take a cab.
The final stage of healing is using what happens to you to help other people.